What's up, everybody? Here we are with the Energy is Love podcast. It's been in full swing now for a little while, a couple weeks, maybe a week. I don't know. It's going great. We're loving everything that we're doing, and we're loving everybody that we're getting to talk to and meet and spreading this love and this energy out there. So I'd like to thank our sponsors for the show, Crystal Water Float Spa. Go online, crystalwaterfloat.com, or find them on Facebook at their Facebook page. You can just search Crystal Water Float Spa. Perfect time to check them out. It's this Saturday, June 4th. We're having our spiritual intuitive fair there. It's going to run from 10 to 6. It's going to be a good opportunity, not just to check out the spa and check out the tanks and find out more about what they do. It's going to be a really good opportunity to come out and get some energy work done, get some healing done, even just sit before somebody and let them read your cards, let them read your palm. Michael Ingleby, he's going to be there. He's been on our podcast. Lady Luna will be there. Kat Meyer. We've got a handful of people that are going to be there that you've heard already on the podcast, and some that you haven't heard yet, but they're going to be on the podcast as well. So come out, say hello, check them out. Remember, it's Saturday, June 4th at the Crystal Water Float Spa. That's 40 West Vine Street in Twilla, Utah. If you're enjoying the podcast and you're enjoying listening, by all means, donate. We've got a GoFundMe account set up. You can go find that on our Facebook page. We've got it linked there. Like I said, if you're enjoying the podcast and you're enjoying what we're doing, go and support us. Throw us some cash, send us some love and some energy so that we can keep doing and we can keep expanding and seeing where this thing grows. We're also always looking for new sponsors. If you want to become a sponsor of the podcast, we'd love to have you. Reach out and contact us. You can email us at energyislovepodcast@gmail.com or go to our Facebook page and message us there. You can find us on Facebook at Energy is Love Podcast. So on today's episode of the Energy is Love podcast, this is a special episode, Float Stories. We're going to be highlighting the experience of floating, sensory deprivation tanks, everything that it brings, not just individuals' own personal stories and the way that floating's changed their lives, but people in the industry, people that are out there doing their thing. We just want to bring awareness to floating. On today's episode, I got the opportunity to sit down with Graham and Ashkahn. These guys, they come from Portland, Oregon. They have a float center up there called Float On. You can find them online at floathq.com. They've been driving around the country for the last 3 months on this thing they're calling the Float Tour, driving around the country, going from the United States up to Canada, back and forth, all over the place, checking out different float centers, different spas, talking to everybody involved with it. And we had the unique opportunity to sit down with these guys, and it was a really, really good experience. So I hope you guys enjoy the episode. This is, once again, a special episode of the Energy is Love podcast, Float Stories. Energy is love.
The Energy is Love podcast.
Energy is love.
The Energy is Love podcast.
The Energy is Love podcast.
The Energy is Love podcast.
Podcast for the universe. Energy is love.
That's perfect.
So today on the Energy is Love podcast, I have two special guests with me. Part of the Energy is Love podcast is we're bringing awareness to floating and all the amazing benefits that it has. So this is going to be a special episode of Float Story, and we're going to highlight these two guys sitting before me. So go ahead and introduce yourselves.
All right, my name is Ashkahn Jerome.
And I'm Graham Talley.
And we're here from Float On, actually. We have our own float tank center out in Portland, Oregon.
That's amazing. And you guys are here in Twilla, Utah.
Yep. And the reason that we're here is actually because we're in the midst of a kind of cross-country float road trip that we've been calling the Float Tour. So through the U.S. and Canada, we've actually been on the road for about 2.5 months so far in an RV, just traveling around and visiting float tank centers with no real purpose other than going and hanging out with people, just because pretty much everybody who runs a float tank center is incredibly fun to hang out with.
Yep, and this now I think is our 128th stop or somewhere right around there. So yeah, it's been just a complete floaty whirlwind across the country and in Canada too.
You guys went to Canada?
Yep. So we already went through kind of Montreal and Toronto, and actually after this we're headed all the way up north to go into Alberta, up into Calgary and Edmonton.
Are there a lot of spas up there?
Yeah, actually, both Calgary and Edmonton and Vancouver have a number of float tanks, anywhere from like 5 to 7 to, I think Vancouver, last we heard, has something like 14 centers.
Wow. So I'm new to the realm of, no, I'm not new to the realm of floating, but the whole business aspect of it. And you guys would obviously know better than I do. Is it something that has just kind of exploded in the last little bit, or how long have you guys been in it?
So we opened in October of 2010, so about 5.5 years now we've been around, which in the float world does feel like float grandparents or something like that. It's really insane how fast the industry has been taking off.
Have you seen it expand since then? Like, does it seem like it's just been blowing up?
Very much so, and especially in the last couple of years. But yeah, it's been totally wild to witness, especially from the inside. We opened up with 4 tanks initially. We've expanded to 6 since then. But when we opened up, there were 3 other places that had 4 tanks.
Just up there in Portland?
No, just around the entire United States. And that was it. And suddenly we were big players in the industry. And now, opening up a 4-tank center, we see it happening all the time.
Yeah.
Just the amount on our road trip that we visited places that have only opened in the last 6 months or a year is a tremendous amount of spots. It really is just on this that bottom of the hockey stick kind of starting to shoot up.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. We've loved it here in Tooele. I mean, for us in the Crystal Water Float Spa, we've got 2 tanks and we're expanding up to 3 tanks, but it's really amazing to see, we always tell people that it's magic water. And if you can just get them in the door and get them in the pod and get them in that tank, then it kind of sells itself. You don't have to worry about the rest. You guys also are putting on the conference this fall, right?
Yeah, that's right. So we put on the float conference that happens in Portland every year, usually in August. And this is actually going to be the 5th year of it, which is kind of crazy.
So you guys have done that you guys put it on. You're the ones that are responsible for it.
Yep, that's right.
And it's the 5th year, and you guys have been in floating for the last, did you start that right off the bat, or?
I guess not too long after. Yeah, so we opened in 2010, and the first conference was late 2012. So it was about 2 years. I think it was just right after our 2-year anniversary that we threw the first float conference.
And why did you guys decide to do that? How did that come to be?
I mean, kind of similar to this whole float tour that we're on. It just sounded like a lot of fun. Kind of opening up with 4 tanks back in the day, we were getting lots of phone calls from people kind of seeing our center and asking us questions and wanting to open up their own center. And, we just thought it'd be really fun to kind of have everyone out to Portland. We opened up, and this other great place across town called the Float Shop opened up, and then this other place got a float tank called Moonja Massage, and all of a sudden there was a number of float tank centers in Portland.
It's kind of that little community.
Yeah, it was a cool community, and it seemed to be really growing there, and people were aware of it, and so it was kind of this little floating hub, and we thought it'd be fun to have people come out, and Portland's kind of an awesome city too, especially in the summer. So yeah. We had everyone fly out in 2012, and we had 165 people come out even that first year, which was kind of crazy for the float industry. And ended up just being way too much fun to not do every year. It was basically what happened.
More we're just having a party and hanging out and bringing it
on. Yeah, exactly. A party with PowerPoints is That's usually cool. How I describe
it. Each of you take a minute and tell me your own personal float story. So how did you come to floating? Tell me about that.
So I guess I found floating just a little bit before Ashkahn did, and it was a mutual friend of ours, one of my good friends since high school, Quinn Zapata, who got me into it. And he had floated right before he moved up to Portland, so he was down in LA floating with Crash down at Venice Beach down there at Float Lab. And his first float that he went in for, I think he did 3.5 hours his first time.
Really?
And just got really deep into it and had this amazing experience. And after moving up to Portland, we were just kind of talking about ways that he could maybe get out of his crappy tech support job that he was in, which is paying him a little bit too much money to actually quit right off the bat. So that was kind of my introduction. I was actually just talking about his time in float tanks and brainstorming businesses that he could potentially start. And so initially I was just kind of giving him advice on the float tanks and helping him along on his journey. And in the process, of course, started floating a bunch myself and just completely fell in love with it. So
how was your first float?
My first float was a little bit underwhelming, but that's the case for probably my first dozen or so floats.
Yeah, we always tell everybody the first float sucks. That's the crappy thing is it's the first one sucks.
That's funny. Well, for some people too, it's I know I definitely have people who their first float is their favorite float that they've ever had as well. So, but for me, I just have a hard time shutting off my brain. It probably was a good 10 or 12 times of floating before I really got deep into it. But I just kind of, like so many people, I think I really connected with the idea and had just a good faith that I would immediately connect with it at some point, even if it wasn't at the outset.
Yeah. And then what about you?
For me, so, I first got introduced to the concept basically through Graham. We had been buddies in college, and I was on a road trip through Portland and, called him up about an hour before I got there and asked if I could sleep on his couch. And when I was there, I kind of asked him and Quinn, who I had met briefly, what they were up to. And they, they basically mentioned they were thinking about opening a float tank center.
Uh-huh.
And so on that trip, I went and tried it over in another person who we started Float On Up with, a guy named Christopher, had a kind of tank set up in his apartment, and went and tried it out there. And I unlike Graham, do not have any trouble turning off my brain. Like, so that part was really easy for me. And I floated for about 2 hours, and I got out, and it was very kind of subtle for me. I almost didn't feel very much until I was sitting out of the float tank and sitting in the Christopher's living room, and he handed me some juice. And we were kind of talking, and I started drinking the juice, and I was just like, this is the best juice I've ever had in my life. and then I kind of left his house, and it was in the middle of summer. It was this beautiful day in Portland.
The birds are chirping.
Yeah, exactly.
The sun is shining.
And so I kind of started walking away from his house, and about 30 minutes later, I realized that I was still walking, and I actually had no destination or like goal for where I was going or anything. Like, I was actually just walking without a purpose, and I hadn't even realized it until a solid 30 minutes later. And then I went and just found like a restaurant and had the best macaroni and cheese I've ever had in my life, And like, kind of after the few hours experiencing it afterwards, I'm like, okay, there's kind of something interesting going on here. Like, I feel really, really good right now.
So your first float didn't suck.
My first float did not suck. It wasn't. I feel like as I floated more, the effects got kind of more profound. So it was definitely kind of more of a, like I said, a subtle experience the first time.
Yeah.
But and like Graham said, we do have people come out who have just their first float is like they're shooting through like crazy star fields and all sorts of stuff, and almost they spend the next number of floats trying to like get back to that place in a certain sense. So it really the kind of experiences really vary person to person.
What do you guys typically tell people, like when they ask you, first off, what is floating, what to expect? How do you guys explain it? Like, let me hear your spiel on how you sell floating.
And Ashkahns is probably a little bit different than mine, but I think at some point you always get down your float. You have to say it thousands of times over the course of running a float tank center. So
yeah, everybody's got their spiel.
Yeah, definitely. So I usually say that it's like a perfect bathtub. That's how I'll describe it. So about 4 feet wide and 8 feet long. And it's really shallow, so only about a foot of water on the inside, and then about 1,000 pounds of Epsom salt mixed in with that water, which just makes it buoyant. And that alone is amazing. Your spine decompresses and your muscles get to relax because they're not fighting gravity. And then all the water is kept at skin temperature, so you just kind of lose track of where your body ends and where the water begins. And the rooms are really soundproof and light-proof, so when you turn off the light on the inside of the tank, there's no light, no sound, no sense of touch, and almost no gravity on your body. And you just float there. And it's like a condensed vacation for your brain and your body is usually what I say.
A condensed vacation. I like that. Is yours similar, your spiel?
Yeah, actually, it's remarkably similar to that. I'm sure we've said our spiels in front of each other so many times that they've kind of blended. But yeah, sometimes I'll describe it about the size of like a queen size bed or so, just because I feel like that's one thing people always assume it's.
I know,
much smaller.
Yeah, when you get in those tanks, sometimes you're kind of shocked at how big it is.
Yeah. So that's I kind of like sneak that in there to try to get people to imagine something a little bit bigger. And one thing I found useful is almost kind of like exactly what Graham did, kind of going over the basics of floating, and not necessarily delving into all of the benefits kind of right off the bat. Kind of it gives people an opportunity to ask questions afterwards that helps direct the conversation a little bit more. Because it's almost impossible to explain floating to someone and not have it be followed up by a dozen questions.
Yeah.
So yeah, a lot of times I'll just kind of explain the basics, and then from there they'll ask me like, "Oh man, that sounds really good." I'm like for sleeping, or "Oh, I have this like shoulder issue, or I have arthritis," and it kind of depending on what they ask, it helps you talk about those aspects of floating a little bit easier. So it's if someone comes and talks about arthritis, and you kind of have that conversation rather than having the whole like crazy visualizations conversation, and so it kind of helps
tailor it towards the customer.
Yeah, exactly.
Have you guys ever slept in one? Have you guys ever spent a night in a float tank?
Definitely, yeah. Fallen asleep in a float tank and spent the night in a float tank. It's not something I do consistently, or I don't actually find it easy to fall asleep on command in a float tank. So it's much more when it has happened to occur. Yeah, sometimes I'll just conk out and come to 3 hours later.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I've spent, I don't know about like a full night, but floated from like the evening to about 5 in the morning.
That's
what
I want to do.
That.
I want to set up the intention to go and spend the night and sleep in the tank. You guys have, what's the longest stretch that you've ever done?
Mine was probably somewhere around like 5 or 6 hours, and that was even, I didn't even mean to. Like, I just hopped in around midnight, and it felt like 45 minutes had gone by, and I kind of got out, and I was just like, oh my god, it's 5:30 in the morning. So I don't know. It's funny because floating at night is, the different times of day I found can kind of alter your experience almost more than a lot of other variables. Mm-hmm. So for me, like floating in the night is actually not even my favorite time to float. I really love floating kind of like mid-afternoon when my brain is in full swing. I enjoy being in that environment when I get to think through things and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I've definitely floated many times of night, but my goal was never to try to go like all the way through the night or anything like that. But you can. I tried to start sleeping on my back every night to prepare myself to be able to like stay in the float tank longer and longer at night.
Training for your float.
Yeah, exactly. I went through about like 2 months of trying to do that, but it was hard to kind of adjust your sleep like that.
Yeah. Graham, you haven't, like, what's your longest stretch?
So my longest that I was in there was for 12 hours. But that was like almost the opposite. I was actually aiming for 24 hours, so I had to get out a little bit earlier for like non-float related issues. I'm going to try again and go for another 24.
What was that 12 hours like? Did you sleep the majority of it?
No, I was actually probably like pretty alert for the majority of it, but time gets really fluid inside the float tanks, as I'm sure you know. So, I mean, even when I'm sure, just much like Ashkahn too, it might have been that there were 3-4 hour stretches in there that just kind of passed really fast, but I didn't necessarily realize at the time. And I wasn't checking the time either, so I didn't realize kind of how long I'd been in there when I did get out. It was actually we'd just kind of raised the levels of hydrogen peroxide in our tank, and after 12 hours, I was starting to feel like a little bit of stinging on my scalp. I think from that, I'm not actually sure. I also have pretty sensitive skin on my head, so I think next time I'll try to not add in that much disinfectant, but like that was the only thing that made me get out. And so I got out and checked my clock, and I'm like, oh wow, 12 hours. That's not too
impressive.
bad. Yeah. But yeah, it was very much, it kind of goes in waves. After you kind of get past that hour and a half period, or maybe a couple hours, I find that the floats really do. You kind of drop into this very deep spot, and you'll come back out of it, and then sort of drop down into it again. And so yeah, there were periods of just physical stretching, and other periods of not thinking about anything and just kind of letting time pass, and other ones of very concrete thought that I was actually churning over different issues that I had on my head. And yeah, so really all over the place, just like floats are different time to time. Over the course of 12 hours, the float itself kind of takes on these different mutable forms.
Yeah, that's cool. That's way cool. So this is the Energy is Love podcast, and I talked to you guys a little bit about what I do and all the hippie spiritual stuff that I'm into and everything, and that's what floating is for me. Are you guys... like when you go and float, especially, you kind of described it where it kind of takes on its own form and it kind of moves through different phases and different stages when you're in there, especially for 12 hours. But do you guys have any sort of those kind of crazy experiences, whether you want to call them out-of-body experiences or astral projection or just really lucid kind of visions and dreams and things like that when you're inside the tank? Have you guys gone through that experience at all?
Yeah, I think it's funny. Graham and I have some of like the worst visuals in the float tank. Like I've almost never seen anything. One time I saw purple for like a few seconds, and I got really excited, and then it disappeared because I got like way too excited about it. But I have, I've definitely entered into states where I'm having these different, almost like semi-dream-like experiences of going through things. And it's funny because I have such poor visuals in there. All of my dream-like states are also like totally dark and like I can never see anything in them. I'm just kind of more experiencing going through these different stories and stuff like that. But yeah, one time I in my float tank actually like was having this dream about hopping in another float tank. So I went 2 levels deep, and ever since then I'm still a little worried that I'm actually still floating right now, and I didn't make it all the way back out.
2 levels deep. I hope I know what you're referencing. Inception.
Yeah, it felt very much like that.
That's awesome. What about you, Graham? Any crazy experiences?
So like Ashkahn said, it's funny because we are very much not the typical floaters in that sense. For us, I think it's very relaxing and very physical experience. That said, I have had a couple times where it was like one time I remember afterwards just sitting bolt up in the float tank and just saying like, what the heck was that? But and that was one of the strongest times where I actually felt kind of that out of body sort of experience. And it was very short too. I was just sitting down at the end of our float center, like in a chair, and kind of looking at the wall. and I felt like this cord kind of tugging at my back, and I was getting closer and closer towards the entrance to our shop. And it went like faster and faster, and all of a sudden I'm like going out the door to our shop, and then that's when I sat upright in my tank, and I was just like, "Whoa, where? Oh, right, I'm still in a float tank. Right, good."
Yeah.
But yeah, very much the exception. That's probably the most lucid that I've gotten, and I see maybe a little bit more than Ashkahn does than Colors, but. Yeah, hearing stories of some of the floaters that come out and the different journeys that they've gone on, both, makes me a little jealous. And also it seems silly that as owners, we also just seem to have some of the weakest visuals, even of the people who just come through and float once and they're telling us their stories. And we're like, oh, that sounds really cool.
Yeah. See, I come at it from that point of view because for me, I've experienced all of those things outside of floating. So I've had those experiences just through meditation and different things like that. And so when I learned about floating, I wanted that environment because the whole sensory deprivation where you're not exposed to light, sound, anything else. And so I'm able to go in there and just get some really, really amazing experiences. And for me, I think that it's incredibly beneficial, not just in a spiritual sense, and I'm getting guidance and information and all that kind of crazy stuff, but physically, do you know what I mean? It takes me to that place mentally, that theta state through meditation that helps. And I know you guys realize that. I know you guys see that and the benefits from it. Do you think that it's something, like I'm going to challenge you a little bit. Do you think that it's something that you guys could practice? Does that make sense?
I mean, I think the brain is amazing at what it can accomplish when you kind of start practicing different things and stretching those muscles. So yeah, I mean, I guess I haven't really been like hardcore in pursuing it just because I think I still have, excellent floats. I have these great experiences and, I have many moments when I go in there and have these kind of like epiphanies almost where there's obviously been something going on in my life that I needed to think through that was kind of underneath the surface and hopping in there kind of pushed everything aside so that I could discover things like that and, great physical benefits and feeling just very satiated afterwards, and so maybe there's a part of it that I think that I've never felt maybe like I even needed more out of my floats because it kind of gives you what you need in the moment has always been my philosophy on it.
For sure.
So, and I've also found that when I hop into the float tank with an intention, the float tank always kind of just like laughs at me. It's like, no, like we're not going to do what you want to do. We're going to do what I want to do.
Yeah.
So I think at a certain point, I just kind of like let go of anything like that and just like hop in and see what happens.
You see what happens. Well, I think that's enough talk when it comes to all that crazy hippie stuff. But tell me more about this whole adventure you guys have been on, because it honestly sounds like an amazing thing. Like it sounds like something that's been super cool. What's some of the highlights, some of the things you guys have enjoyed about this trip?
Yeah, I mean, so honestly, even more than seeing any place individually, I think just the collection of float centers that we've gotten to visit has been really amazing. Seeing people in just all different setups, from very medical setups to very spa-like setups, even ones that are just single float tanks at very high-end spas doing expensive massage. And we went to one place that was up in Ottawa, which was actually almost more like a half float setup. So they had a little less salt in the water. But it was a giant room that could fit about 30 people floating at one time.
Really?
And wasn't total sensor deprivation. So they had candles and like different kind of tints to the light as well. It was sort of bluish coming up from there. But the entire room was kept at around 90 degrees probably, so you couldn't also feel the difference between your skin and the water. And I think it was maybe like 15%, 18% salt water instead of up towards the 30% that we like to hit. So just weird spots like that too, where it's like, a giant float cave.
Would they
This
have
is amazing.
people, multiple people floating at the same time?
Yeah. Oh yeah. When we went in there, I think there were at least like 15 to 20 people all floating in the room. Yeah. We didn't get to actually try it out, unfortunately. That was one of those really high-end spas. Then we just got a little tour around. But yeah, very cool setups. I don't know if you have any highlights or...
Yeah, I mean, we've definitely seen some incredible things as we've been going around, but almost more like the highlights are just the people who run these float centers are just super cool. Like it's amazing. It's almost more of a testament to kind of floating than a lot of other things that I think most people hear out there. Is just that, it's so obvious that when you go around that these people who have these float center setups are doing it because they love it and they want to share the experience. And, the kind of community or the type of person that's drawn towards the idea of opening a float tank center is and is, you know, very generous and open and sharing and kind. And if they're not, like, they just start floating a bunch. And I think they kind of like slowly turn into those people.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's just been amazing to kind of go around and be treated like family everywhere we go. You know, we've gone to places where we've really only met them in person for about an hour, and then they just hand us the keys to their shop, and they're like, "Hey, we're taking off for the night, but like, here, you guys should just float, and like, we'll see you in the morning."
Yeah.
And I'm just like, these are like, you know, technically in the real business world, these would be our like competitors or whatever, you know, and they're just like handing us the keys to their store, and it's so cool. Like, you just really get to see this amazing vibe of what the float community is like, and you know, it gives me a lot of hope that this thing is going to keep going well and getting bigger, because it really seems like it's coming from the right place.
Do you guys see your like, how big do you expect the conference to be this year? I know we're planning on going up, but how many guests, how many people do you plan on coming?
Yeah, it's always a little hard to tell because most people buy their tickets about like 3 weeks beforehand.
Yeah.
So I'm always kind of just like sitting there like panicked, thinking that maybe nobody's going to show up this year. But yeah, if we kind of like follow the same trend as before, we should be somewhere up in the like 550 people, something around that this year.
That's nice.
Yeah.
That's super cool. I'm assuming too as well, like one of the cool things, because I'm sitting here envisioning your guys' trip, and I'm picturing myself on that trip, and all the, like, everything you're talking about, it seems like it's just really amazing. But you guys also get to see the country. You're driving around in an RV, for heaven's sakes. This is a ginormous road trip. So are you guys taking time to enjoy that aspect and stopping at the sites and doing all that kind of stuff too?
Very, like, almost embarrassingly little we get to see outside of actual float tank centers. There's a lot of the road, which has been really nice. I mean, I actually love road trips, so just getting to see the different scenery and the different geography all over the country is amazing. But as far as actually getting to kind of do that beautiful float or like cross country road trip where you actually see all the sights, like we passed within an hour of the Grand Canyon and did not even get to stop to check it out because we had to run on to the next float tank center. So unfortunately, it's just been a little too breakneck. I mean, even with trying to visit as many float centers as we can, we're probably only hitting about half of them between the U.S. and Canada, and the other half we just have to ignore because they didn't line themselves up really nicely for us. So that said, again, you know, the road itself has been really beautiful.
Yeah.
So I've been enjoying that, and we got to stop by Niagara Falls really briefly was one. The Petrified National Forest we like popped through. Mostly things that happen to be along our path anyway.
If it's convenient, right?
Yeah, both of those we were actually driving through them anyway. So getting to stop for half an hour was totally fine, but yeah, again, embarrassing the extent that we haven't actually seen a lot of the sites.
So it's a work trip with a little bit mixed in, huh?
Yeah, and I think it's just lucky that the work part is so fun. So.
Yeah, that's true. That's one thing we've noticed here. It's like we come to work here at the Float Spot, and I mean, it's not work, man. We're just hanging out, and we love it, and we get to meet cool people. And what's really been surprising for us is the variety of people that come in. You know, people that you would have never guessed were going to be into floating. They're the ones that are coming every week. They're the ones that are buying the memberships, and they want to come float. I'm sure you guys have seen that same thing where you just get, it's kind of that big, broad spectrum of society that is down for floating.
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, we've seen this at our own center. We hear it pretty much everywhere that we go. It's the same story. And it's funny because before people open their centers, it's a very common kind of like businessy question that we get is like, what are the demographics and stuff like that? And we're just like, kind of everybody, like, you know, whoever you want them to be. And people just really, I don't think they believe us when we say that. And then like guaranteed they open their float center and they're like, yeah, it's just everybody. Everybody's coming in to float.
Yeah, I wish, because we always tell people like if we just get them in the door and get them in the tank, the water takes care of the rest and it sells it. But what are some of the things that you guys try to, I guess, like, how do you, I always feel like I'm like the snake oil salesman or the used car salesman, because I'm telling people all these things about floating and all the benefits that it has, and the list of benefits just goes on and on and on and on. But how do you guys kind of manage that on your end, where you're trying to sell them on it, but at the same time you're not trying to sound like a salesman?
Yeah, I mean, so just like earlier, I guess, with our kind of introduction to floating little sales pitch that we have, we save a lot of the benefits until we find out what people are actually looking for, you know, like, because the list of benefits that I pitch is very different for athletes than it is for artists, than it is for people with fibromyalgia, for example.
Yeah.
Just in terms of what it can do for people. And I guess if it gets too crazy and I actually do start feeling like a snake oil salesman, kind of pull the emergency parachute and just say, like, the crazy thing is that it's not the float tank that's really doing any of this, right? The float tank is just the way that we're getting our bodies to not have to take in all of this extra sensory information. And the amazing thing is just that our bodies are so restorative. If there's a snake oil here, it's just human beings and how much we naturally want to take care of ourselves.
Yeah.
And we just don't give ourselves the space to it. You cut out the outside world and temperature and all of these other things. And all of a sudden, people are flying through star fields and recovering from physical conditions and dealing with addiction and improving their sports game and all sorts of crazy things. So to me, the amazing thing is just that that's where human beings want to be naturally.
Yeah.
And that usually kind of allays people's, skepticism filter that goes up.
For sure. That's kind of hippie what you just talked about, because that's the body healing itself, like the mind taking control and kind of doing what it does naturally and healing itself. And the water just kind of being the go-between, the space for that to happen.
Yeah, very much so.
I like that. I'm going to use that. How many, in your guys' estimate, and whether you have an exact number or a guesstimate, how many centers or how many places are there to float in the United States?
Definitely more of a guesstimate, but somewhere between 250 and 350, which is a huge range, but I kind of have a feeling the number is within there somewhere.
Yeah.
It's incredible because it's changing so rapidly. I mean, like Graham was saying on this trip, I mean, if we had done this trip a year ago, we probably would not have seen like 40%, maybe more of the places that we've gone by. I mean, yourselves included here. It's like we're constantly finding places that have been open for 2 months or 3 months, or we've visited places that are opening in 4 days. We're hitting them right before their grand openings and things like that. Places have been opening up behind us. I was just looking back at San Francisco, and there's like 2 more float centers now than when we passed through there. Not too long ago. So it's kind of hard to pin the number down when things are changing so rapidly.
How did you guys come across us? How did you guys find us?
So Flotation Locations, I think, is how we actually found you guys. Website directory for float tanks, which is great. As far as we can tell, that's the most accurate directory that's out there right now and the most comprehensive. And still, there are centers on there that have shut down or other centers that just aren't included. So the best way we found to find float centers is actually to track down some in the area and talk to them and ask them what other float centers are still around and open.
That's probably a pretty good gauge how everybody knows where their competition is. But
yeah, exactly. But yeah, you guys, we just found straight through Flotation Locations, so you made it easy on us.
Oh, sweet. Are there any centers or people right now that are franchising, or is it more individual owners and business owners and things like that?
Yeah, there's a few franchises that have popped up, mostly in the last few years. And I'll just talk about the U.S. and Canada here. There's a few others in Germany and Italy and places like that. But in the U.S. and Canada, I know mostly of 3, which are True Rest, which is in the last few years has opened up a number of places. I think there's something like 14 True Rest locations out there now.
Yeah.
And Urban Float's another one that's based in Seattle, and then there's one in Canada called Float House. So we're still kind of in the beginning stages of it. We're just seeing this kind of franchise model pop up and places actually starting to open, and so it's kind of a new thing for the industry.
Is that something that you guys are thinking about?
Actually franchising our place? Probably not. We just we just have our one center still. Like we don't even have a second location or anything else. And I think we've gotten ourselves pretty busy with our conference, and we make software to run float tank centers and do trainings and workshops and stuff like that. And at a certain point, we had to Graham and I had to actually sit down. I think we're kind of just like addicted to starting new projects, and we had to be like, no more new projects. Like these things are going too crazy.
Except Float Tour.
Yeah, well, maybe we should do a 3-month road trip. But other than that, like no more new projects.
That should be easy. We won't come into any issues there, right?
Yeah, that sounds like a breeze. So franchising hasn't been really something that was on our mind.
Mm-hmm. Where do you see it exploding the most? Like, where have you guys seen just the biggest influx where it's kind of, like you said, just you leave the next day and 2 more open up?
So definitely it's, very similar to just kind of population growth you see around as well. Any centers that are just big population hubs, we've seen a lot of growth, and the coasts, definitely west and east coast. But I think more than that, it's whenever you see a float tank center start up that's a certain size, maybe it's like 4 to 6 tanks or more than that. and it actually gets going and is commercially successful, I think a lot of people end up hopping in their tanks and thinking not only that they had an amazing experience, but also that this seems like an incredible line of work to go into. And so you kind of see these clusters pop up around, it might be one big center opens in Seattle, for example, or in Vancouver or in Portland. And then all of a sudden there is just this surge of interest and a bunch of new centers opening around that area as well.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case with Salt Lake City.
Yeah, it's kind of what we've seen in the in the last little bit. There's one up in Ogden. We're out here in Tooele. There's a center in Salt Lake. But I mean, when I've become aware of it and started to look at, that's kind of what it seems like is happening. Is like you said, people go out and they try it and they're like, hey, this is a good idea. We should put one of these up where I live. I know our owners, Jim and Huey, that's basically what happened for them. They fell in love with floating and they were traveling to go do it. And then they had such a difficult time getting in, and the guy was always booked out. And, it's like, why are we spending time, energy, and money to go travel and float? We're just going to open up our own center in the town that we live in. So I also want to talk about, because I'm kind of spoiled because you guys have this wealth of information and knowledge. So I'm kind of using you right now as Google. But talk to me about the way you've seen the technology of floating change and the ways, do you know what I mean? Is it different from when you guys started as far as like not just the tanks and the designs, but where people are taking it?
It's interesting. There's definitely been a lot of manufacturers that have popped up in the last, 5 years or so. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think by my last count, we're somewhere up to about 45 manufacturers of float tanks all around the world. Probably about like 15 of which are kind of here in the U.S. and Canada. And so, they're coming out with new designs and certainly more sophisticated kind of control systems with the ability to, put things on timers and set their lights and custom music and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But it's almost kind of more remarkable to me how much the technology has stayed the same. Like you kind of look back in the day towards these tanks that popped up in the, the Samadhi tank, basically that got created in the 70s, and really how much that kind of, once you're on the inside and all the bells and whistles and everything are kind of gone, like the actual float experience I found to be remarkably similar from tank to tank. Like I'll hop in almost any tank and
have kind the same kind of experience.
Yeah, it's like that kind of core part of it is I don't know, it's so kind of like fundamental in a certain way, or just so when you're really just trying to get down to that nothing sort of state. It's like you get there and it's great. And it's almost like, if the tank's a little bit different sized or shaped or whatever, about 10 minutes in, you kind of forget about all that stuff.
Yeah.
And you're just off in float land. So it's been cool to see that happening. I think we've seen a lot of technology in the centers that has been interesting, mostly like related to construction. I think people are starting to open up with, more heavy duty soundproofing and things like that to really try to get that experience to be kind of like more and more fine tuned.
What kind of pods do you guys have? Like, what do you guys have in your place?
So we have a mix. So we started with 2 ocean float rooms and an Oasis tank and then a home built tank. And very quickly the home built tank got destroyed. So we switched that out for another Oasis tank. So we had 2 ocean float rooms and 2 Oasis tanks. And we from there expanded and actually built our own kind of full custom float rooms. So those ones are about 7 feet wide by 8 feet long, and the entire room is the float tank. So they're not enclosed at all. And very, very big and beastly.
So is it like you step down into the water? Is that kind of what it is?
It's raised up, but same kind of idea. So we just have a concrete slab that it's sitting on top of, as opposed to be sunken down in there. But still just a very big open room. And then we just finished switching out our 2 Oasis tanks for other tanks. So now we have a Genesis or Evolution pod in there and a zero gravity tank from Austin, Texas.
Do you guys have a favorite?
I personally don't. I'm not sure if Ashkahn does. I actually tend to switch between all of our tanks and try to actually like make the rounds and float in all of them.
Yeah.
And I think that sort of stopped me from having a favorite tank as much. I do think that some of the favorites that you have are just tanks you happen to be floating in when you had a really good experience. And so, they're kind of all my babies. I'm not sure if you have a favorite.
Yeah, it's kind of the same for me. Like I could honestly be blindfolded and put into any of them, and I'm not even sure I could tell a huge difference. And our customers too, same thing. They just kind of find their own little preference, and we don't see like them heavily weighted towards one of our styles or anything else. even when we had two Oasis tanks and they were literally exactly the same, we'd have people who'd be like, oh, can I get like this Oasis tank, please? And I'm just like, why that one? They're like, well, I mean, it's just my tank. That's the one that I float in. So yeah, you just kind of get this like sentimental attachment, I think, with some of them.
You do. I have a favorite room here at our spa, and granted, I'll float wherever, but that's my favorite room. That's my favorite pod to float in. And you guys do straight up just sensory deprivation floats, right? You're not necessarily incorporating music into it. And do you encourage people going that route where they just are in that complete darkness, no sound, no outside influence, right?
Yeah, we're pretty kind of like hardcore, I guess, in terms of being purists. Like we don't tend to give people a lot of kind of easing them into the situation or anything. We just kind of toss them in there, and there's no intro music or anything like that.
Tell me your whole thought process behind that. Like, I'm curious because for me, that's why I float. I like that environment. But what's your thought process behind that?
So part of it is, we like the music's a good question, right? We get that all the time. People coming in and wondering if they can play music while they're floating. And I'm not actually opposed to that sort of stuff. And we've done it for people, and I've floated with music in there and various things like that. And I think there's some merit to experimenting in different types of floats and stuff. But what I'm really concerned about is I don't want people kind of using those things as a crutch. Like I think a lot of people maybe want to listen to music because they think they're gonna just go like be super bored in there or whatever it is, and they want that thing to latch onto. So often what I tell to people is, you can we have iPod hookups and we can totally play music for you, but I really recommend try 3 floats just without anything, and then talk to us. Let us know after that point if you want to start playing with music and things like that. And they almost never bring it up again. It's like once they kind of try the experience, I think a lot of people weren't quite sure that's actually what they wanted until they hop in there and float like that, and then they come out. And it's after that point, it's very, very seldom we get a request. And when we do, it's from people who are like our members or super regular floaters who want to hop in there with some subliminal messaging track they made for themselves if they're like a fighter, kind of experimenting with some cool stuff.
Some mantras and different things.
Yeah, which is totally cool. And they've enjoyed it a lot. And I think there's certainly a whole side of floating that involves kind of, incorporating different things like that. But my main concern is I want people to, people who really, what they really want is that kind of full darkness, quiet experience, but who are maybe accidentally going to cheat themselves of it because they're nervous. Those are the people who I'm trying to get to experience it kind of that way, and then so they can make a more educated decision.
Yeah, that's a good point of view. I really like that because you do see people that when we have people float, a lot of times they're nervous. It's obviously a new experience. They don't know what to expect. They're worried about being claustrophobic in there. They're worried about they're freaked out because you lay in somebody else's bathwater naked and all that kind of stuff, right? And so we might have to implement that because I think that's the biggest benefit is having that environment where you don't have any outside distraction and you just get to go and be in that space. But we're starting to do one of these things here at our spa, and I don't know if we're not the only spa that's doing it, but I wanted to get you guys' idea about it. So our pods are big enough where you can actually fit 2 people in them. And we're going to do a thing where once a month we have a day set aside where people can come and float together so that you have that couple float and everything. Do you guys see that a lot, or is that something that you guys have tried?
We see it. So at our center, we don't allow it. So we just do singles floats, even in our double wide, huge float tanks. Which again, I think we just tend to be more hardcore than a lot of people. So it's the same safety blanket. People come in, they're like, "Oh, can I play music and go in there with another person?" We're like, "No, by yourself in total darkness, like no one else." So we have seen it around. It does seem to be a lot more popular over in Europe, especially Germany. We've heard of a lot of couples floats being set up, and even on the other side of town, the float shop did it for a while, and there's other places that have done couples floating around that we've seen too. It's definitely I've also couples floated myself. I guess is the other part of that story, and gone in with my girlfriend before. And it's not actually surprising how much you can lose track of the other person in the tank with you. And it is kind of like that solo float experience, but ultimately, I think it is a little bit of a different experience. And we hear a lot that it's a really nice introduction for people into floating. And a lot of people will come in for couples floats and then not come in again for couples floats. Then one member of the couple or another or both will come in and start floating by themselves.
Yeah.
And so I know, hearing those things, it makes, I think for our center, it makes it even less likely that we'll do them, just like that they actually are using this for a safety blanket, and they tend to like it better when they're floating by themselves. Just, yeah, it makes us want to force people into that situation where there actually is no one else there and nothing going on.
Yeah, I'd almost want to do nothing to like incentivize it. Like, you know, you can't do it if it's your first float, and you know, not make it any cheaper so people aren't like doing it to save money. You know, it'd just be like twice the cost, or you know, it's pretty much all those are the things that I get concerned about. And that's to say that, like, you know, we've also heard good stories. You know, and I've done it myself too, and it is like kind of, it's a different experience and it's a different float, but you know, it has kind of its own merit to it. And we've talked to couples who have had really good experiences and said that it's been really good for their relationships and things like that. But yeah, my main fear in doing it at a center is exactly that. I just don't want people doing it instead of floating regularly, if that's what they actually want.
Purists.
I know. We're really
like float Nazis here. I love that.
Yeah, that's right. We just kick people out.
That's too funny. You mentioned a bunch of different spas, and like I said, I'm sure it's everywhere. It's not just in the States. It's not just in Canada. Do you guys have any centers that are from outside of the country that come to the event?
The conference?
Yeah, the conference.
Oh yeah, totally. We get people from all around the world, like pretty much as far as you could go. We've had people from New Zealand and Australia and China and South America and Mexico. You know, lots of people from Canada. You know, people from Europe. Just kind of all over. Yeah, it's very much a global event. There's people who coming out from the furthest reaches around to come hang out with other people in the float community.
That's super cool. Like, I bet you guys never even imagined it when you started, right?
I kind of like, I really knew that our center, it felt good to me. Like, I felt like this was going to be exciting and people were going to be into it, and it always kind of felt like our center was going to be successful because of how interesting floating was and what a good experience it was. And
yeah.
I guess, yeah, that part, like, I kind of did picture happening, but I did not picture the whole rest of it. Like, you know, just kind of this giant, like, budding industry and everything really starting to take off, and all that stuff's been a very delightful surprise.
Yeah. Do you guys have anything else, like, in the works? Like, where do you envision yourself next year? Like you said, if you'd have told yourself 2 years ago that you're going to be traveling around the country on a float tour, what else do you guys see? Where else do you guys see yourself going?
Yeah, we're pretty notorious. Well, I guess human beings are bad at planning ahead, and we just sort of acknowledge that about ourselves as well. So definitely the conference is a blast, and we do consulting with float tank solutions, and getting to help people just start up their centers around is incredibly pleasurable. So I don't really picture those going anywhere. You know, our center is still, we just actually finished some extra construction in our float center. So that's really nice. So hopefully that solidifies that, and we don't have to tear out any more floors or walls for a while, which would be great. Yeah, I flying by the seat of our pants, I guess, is where I see us in another year or two.
I mean, yeah, we didn't even have the idea for this trip until about 3 months ago, or something, or 3 months before we started the trip. So we kind of try not to, you know, create 5-year plans or even kind of lay things out too much for ourselves, because, you know, the world's such an ever-changing place, and our own businesses are changing all the time. And I think for us, it's just worked a little easier to be able to, you know, see what's going on and be a little bit more flexible than having kind of these hard set goals that we're trying to reach.
Yeah, it's like you said, you know, you're not going to go into your float with an intention. You're just going to let that water go and see what happens.
Yeah, exactly.
And again, we're so bad at over planning and doing more than we actually should. So I think not planning ahead is also kind of a control mechanism to stop us from launching into too many insane projects. Like, left to our own devices, we'd probably launch a new company per week or something like that. So
yeah, there'd be float tanks on the moon, I think, would probably be our plan, you know.
Well, that's, you know, 10 years. Give yourselves 10 years to get those tanks up there.
Yeah.
So one of the things with this whole thing, that podcast, and we want to do float stories because we're highlighting the amazingness of floating and stuff. So you guys have been in the business a long time. Give me not just your story, but I want to hear about somebody from your spa, somebody that has come in and floated and you've seen it change their life. So your greatest, you know, the person that you say, hey, so-and-so, this is what's happened for them.
Yeah, I mean, it's the kind of crazy part about a float tank center is we have like dozens of those.
Yeah.
Like, it's totally nuts, you know. And there's some big science happening too now. You know, there's a whole research center out in Oklahoma that's starting to do some serious like fMRI research and things like that.
In conjunction with floating and stuff.
Yeah, the whole like specific float research center.
Yeah.
And so that kind of side of it's coming, and what we get to see at our shop is the other side of it. It's just kind of these anecdotal individual stories of people coming out and having these incredible experiences. But it's been anything from, we had someone who started floating with us way early and started floating basically about 2 or 3 times a week after that point, and just started like swimming every day, lost about 80 pounds, quit smoking, quit drinking. Like she actually got a tattoo on her arm of the moon cycles since her very first float. So it was just like, it affected her life so much. It was almost like a pre-float and post-float was kind of like the way she was denominating parts of her life. So that was incredible. I mean, I've had someone call us and say that they used the float tanks to quit heroin, that they were just on heroin and they started floating with us every other day.
I've seen some of that research and some of that stuff because they're using that now where they can help addicts and things like that.
Yep. So that, I mean, that stuff's been incredible. Painkillers is another one that's unbelievable. People come in who are on kind of this like menagerie of different pain products, pain pills, and will start floating and really reduce those numbers and, they seem happier and more pain free. And I've had people after a single float hop out and just say that they're like, there was this mother who was just saying she doesn't understand why she's so like negative and nagging with her kids, and she's like not going to do it anymore. And she loves her family. And this is like one 90-minute float session.
Changed her whole life.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, it's just wild. It's really the incredible part of running a float tank center is that you get to sit there and like, every day people come out and want to, they have these huge smiles on their face. They want to give you huge hugs. And I'm sure we're not even hearing the half of it. We're only hearing what people tell us.
Yeah.
People who want to open up and share.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, some of the times that I've been the most floored by my own float experiences, I'll go out and my staff is like, hey, how are you feeling? And I'm like, good. Like, don't ask me any more questions right now. Like, I need to go to a park and just think about life or something. So yeah, I'm sure that some of the people who we've really impacted the most will never get to hear about it all.
So the next thing I want to ask you guys about, because you guys are from Oregon, and if I'm not mistaken, weed's legal up in Oregon, right?
Yeah, medically and recreationally now, yeah.
Where do you guys see, because there's a whole big, I don't know if it's a subculture, I don't know if that's the right terminology or the right phrase for it, but there's people that really like to incorporate psychedelics into floating and different things like that. Is that something that you guys are, that you can speak on? Do you have information about that? Because for me personally, I think probably you guys are purists, so you're probably not looking to incorporate anything like that. But just talk on that a little bit if you can briefly.
Yeah, I mean, so I guess the floating does have this tie-in to that whole psychedelic world, largely through John Lilly from back in the day, the Tanks founders, and also through Joe Rogan, which is where a lot of people find it. So there is this natural and historical connection to that psychedelic world with floating. And I mean, the biggest thing is that we are also just a commercial place of business. So if anyone comes in, is obviously intoxicated or tells us about plans to, take mushrooms and hop in a float tank, we pretty much just have to shut them down, or kick them out and tell them to reschedule a float and come in sober or whatever it is. So there's that part of it. And I mean, like you said, we're purists as well. So I would, even if that is, if you're a listener out there and thinking about going in, this is how you're going to have one of your trips is inside a float tank. Definitely advise you to, do mini floats first and get a sense for it. And it might even be that your desire to do psychedelics in the tank goes down after kind of experiencing what your body does on its own.
I was going to say, you can have those experiences without it.
Yeah. Yeah, very much. So it's interesting, and it does seem more of an experiment to do with a friend who has a float tank in their house than in a commercial place of business. And
for sure.
That said, we also people can go in the room and they have a private room and there's not a ton that we can do. So we're putting a lot of trust in the people coming in to use our tanks, that they're responsible and respectful of our place. And fortunately, we've heard some crazy stories from other float tank center owners, but not nearly as much as you'd expect. And in our own place, we haven't had really any instances of people coming in and being out of their gourd or doing anything totally wild in our float center, which is great. And I'm absolutely sure that there have been people who have tripped and we just don't know about it in our center. I'd be shocked if that weren't the case over 60,000 floats that we've run.
For sure.
But, again, it's at least people who have been conscious enough that we didn't know. There's no way that we could tell the difference. So, I don't know if you had anything else to say on that one.
Yeah, I mean, kind of just exactly I think these things are all just tools, We're using these tools to be able to, have different experiences for our mind to, raise different thoughts up and get a different perspective on the world. And it's one of those same things where I think kind of floating first by itself. You know, I almost feel like you should be an advanced floater before you start introducing all these other elements into it.
An
you know,
advanced floater.
Yeah.
We have to open up a float school now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so yeah, I also, you know, it's one of those things, and I think that's kind of the really interesting thing about float tanks is once you do get it under your belt, you know, where you want to experiment with it is interesting. Once you kind of strip it down to nothing, you know, then you just can add like one variable back in and experience different things, and people really go lots of different places with that. Like some people will want to go like, you know, hearing music, and other people have I know of a place that does like acupuncture sessions while you're in a float tank and
While you're in the tank.
Yeah, totally. So there's you know, there's kind of so many different, we haven't even, back in the 80s when these tanks were around, there were lots of them with like screens and stuff in them for people to, whatever it is, watch some sort of, you know, tennis practice session and kind of like visualize themselves getting better at tennis or whatever. So you know, we've just recently started talking about people who were thinking about trying to like make a salt-proof VR headset that they could put in inside the float tank. So yeah, I think I'm certainly not like against experimentation or anything like that. And I think there's so many fun things to try in the float tank, and it's a really interesting environment to try things out in. But yeah, I do always, the purist in me always wants people to try it a few times just by itself, so that you know where you're going and you're being conscious of what you're deciding to do in there.
Yeah. You know, here at the Crystal Water, we incorporate, my wife and I work here, we're intuitive energy practitioners. And so ideally what happens is somebody will sit down and have a session with us, and we'll work through and do some energy work and chakra balancing and all sorts of different types of things. And then they get to go hop in a tank and they get a float afterwards. And that's a really neat experience, because I don't know how familiar you guys are when it comes to the spiritual side of energy work and things like that, but it takes you to a place a lot of times where, you know, you're kind of jacked up, like things happen and you're dealing with a lot of past baggage and issues, and things get brought to the surface, and then you get to go lay back and float. You get to go sit back and relax and have the time to process and get the healing properties of being in the water and things like that. Have you guys come across any other centers in the country where people are incorporating some of those type of spiritual aspects, you know, that kind of really tie into floating, but they're working in conjunction? Like you said, you can acupuncture while you're floating. What other kind of stuff like that have you guys seen or come across?
Yeah, so it's really all over the place. You know, like you said, you know, there's people doing just energy work in small side rooms and different float centers around. You know, everything to a bunch of crazy unmanned services like magnetospheres and far infrared saunas are really common, things like that. But yeah, definitely acupuncture. Reiki is not an uncommon thing to see attached to float tank centers as well. What else on kind of the like more healing energy side? I mean, definitely even just a little more within the system, but counselors or psychologists will hook up you know, even intercom, so they can talk back and forth with patients who are in the float tank currently. Really? Those have been some pretty cool setups, actually.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing to me how versatile float tanks are. Really is the incredible part. Like you can see it in anywhere from these environments where people are doing kind of energy work before people hop in, all the way to a float tank like in the middle of an MMA gym, you know, where people were just like, you know, going and like fighting with each other and then hopping into a float tank. So it's and like everything in between. And it's one of the kind of amazing things to me about floating is that it really just, and you describe any of these kind of combinations to people, and it's always sounds right. You're like, oh yeah, that sounds great.
That'll work.
Yeah. And so, it's, I think it really speaks to kind of the, almost like the fundamental nature of the float. Like the fact that you're hopping in there and really just getting down to kind of like nothingness and letting your body kind of do what it needs to do is kind of a very universal thing. And so I think it makes it super easy to connect it with so many other things. And it's almost a way to kind of, I like to think of things kind of like setting into your body while you're in the float tank. So if you do a massage beforehand, you know, hop in there and things really like settle in. And, and if you're doing, you know, more mental kind of therapy or whatever it is, you know, or the energy work that all that stuff, when you're actually in the float tank, you're kind of giving it a chance to really like seep in and solidify. Yeah.
That's cool. So where can we find all your guys' info? You guys got your center up in Portland. What's your guys' website for that?
So yeah, our center's website, our center's called Float On, and floathq.com is the website for that. We got a lot of websites. Our float conference is just floatconference.com, so that one's pretty simple.
Yep. And then we have our different, we have a blog that has over 100 posts just all about floating and running a float tank center, and a bunch of other resources for people starting up at floattanksolutions.com.
And that blog actually is, we're blogging this kind of whole float tour on there. So if people want to see our travels, they can hop on and look at that.
And then our software is floathelm.com, like a ship's helm. We have our music program online at thetastaterecords.com.
Our coincidence control books.com.
Yep, coincidencebooks.com.
Coincidencebooks.com. We have too many. I can't even remember all of them. But when I was talking about the fact that we start a lot of projects and that we need to kind of control ourselves, this is the result of that.
Yeah, but that's where we started publishing John Lilly books through, was Coincidence Books, and getting programming, meta-programming out there, and a couple other float titles as well.
And you guys are on Facebook?
Yeah, and if you go to any of those websites, you'll track us down on there. Yeah, absolutely.
Where are you guys headed next on this tour?
So next, we actually start heading north from here. So we kind of go through Idaho Falls and a lot of that whole part of the country up into Canada. And then we actually make it up to Calgary and Edmonton and down through Vancouver and Seattle. And then eventually we'll be back in Portland.
How much longer? You said you only got a couple months left, or?
A couple weeks left. Yeah, a few more. We'll be back in like 2020, I think.
Have you guys, are you excited to go home?
So we've actually both gotten to take small trips back during the course of our road trip, just because there's things back in town that call, sometimes the float center just has needs, so we need to go meet, and we do trainings back in Portland once a month, so we've been kind of switching off going back. But it's we actually both love life on the road. Traveling has been, the hardest thing is just that we have regular work that we need to keep up with for our float tank center on our other projects, and finding time to do that while we're traveling is challenging. But other than that, no, I could stay out until 2020 and be totally happy.
Yeah, like I'm having to fight the urge to just not do another loop as soon as we get back to Portland.
Yeah. And then what's the dates of the conference?
The conference is August 20th and 21st.
Super cool, and that's just up in Portland, right?
Yep. It's in Portland every year, and usually in August. And also on the website, thefloatconference.com, is all the videos from past years, so you can hop on and kind of see all the different speakers and get to experience the conference a little bit.
Yeah, well, we're looking forward to heading up, and I really appreciate you guys not just swinging by the spa and coming out. I think it's super cool what you guys are doing, and we're glad that we're on your trip and on your map, and that you guys made the trip out. And I really, really appreciate you guys sitting down and taking the time to do the podcast with me. We're way excited about all of it. So thank you.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having us.
Yeah, very fun. Pleasure being on here.
Yeah. Well, everybody, thanks for listening, and go find all their stuff. And if you don't know about floating already, this is a wonderful opportunity for you to learn about it. Go out, Google it, figure it out. Go find a center near you. It sounds like there's going to be one near you next week anyway. So go get in a tank and float. But everybody have a wonderful day.
Party with PowerPoints.
By yourself in total darkness like no one else.
One time I saw purple. This is the best juice I've ever had.